Perhaps what exhausts you the most is not what is happening today, but the parts of you that have never truly been allowed to rest. When night falls, the body lies still, yet the mind remains awake, carrying old memories, unfinished emotions, and questions that do not need answers right now. You want to sleep, but deep within, there is still something quietly waiting to be listened to. Carl Gustav Jung looked directly at this paradox. He believed that human beings do not lack effort, but lack a compassionate encounter with the unconscious. And Marie-Louise von Franz, Jung's devoted student, pointed to a very quiet path, where healing does not come from force, but from allowing the psyche to speak in its own natural language, symbols, images, and dreams. Hello, my name is Milo, your narrator for tonight. In the hours ahead, I will be here not to teach you something new, but to accompany you into the soft settling of the mind. This video does not promise to change you overnight. What it offers is a safe space where you can let your shoulders drop, slow your breathing, and allow these very gentle words to reach the deepest layers of you. In the hours to come, you do not need to understand anything more. Just listen, because sometimes, when the ego is willing to step back, the deepest transformation begins naturally. The moment just before falling asleep is not loud, not dramatic, yet it carries a rare psychological power. It is a fragile transitional zone between waking and dreaming, between control and release, between the daytime ego and the deep life of the psyche. Jung referred to such regions as liminal spaces, thresholds where the familiar order of consciousness temporarily dissolves, and the unconscious is given the chance to rise to the surface without obstruction. In those roughly 30 seconds, the ego is no longer alert enough to censor, analyze, or resist. It softens. And it is precisely in this softening that the psyche becomes most receptive. Jung never regarded sleep as a state in which the mind simply shuts down. On the contrary, he believed that when consciousness withdraws, inner life finally begins to operate at full capacity. He wrote in The Structure and Dynamics of the Psyche. The psyche is far from being a unity. It is a contradictory multiplicity of conscious and unconscious processes. During the day, the ego occupies the center, striving to maintain a coherent sense of self. But when night falls, this structure loosens, and unconscious processes, repressed memories, unresolved conflicts, denied emotions begin to seek expression. The moment before sleep is the point of intersection where these two worlds touch each other in silence. What makes this moment extraordinary lies not only in the physiology of sleep, but in its symbolic meaning. Jung consistently emphasized that the psyche does not operate through linear logic, but through images, symbols, and suggestion. Before sleep, rational language gradually dissolves, giving way to a more primordial language, the language the unconscious understands. This is why what we whisper to ourselves at that moment is not merely words, but symbolic propositions planted directly into the deep structure of the psyche. Jung warned that whatever remains unconscious will continue to govern our lives from behind the scenes. His well-known statement echoes as a stern yet compassionate reminder. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. The moment before sleep does not demand that we make the unconscious conscious through analysis. It asks for something far simpler: gentle presence. When the ego is willing to step back, the unconscious can already begin to speak. And the whispers that arise in that state, however brief, may become profound guidance for the inner process unfolding through the night. Marie-Louise von Franz, who quietly and faithfully carried forward Jung's legacy, paid particular attention to nighttime rituals. She understood that the psyche does not need more effort, but more space. Within that space, neglected parts can appear without judgment. Before sleep, human beings are closer to this condition than at any other time of day. The ego is tired. Social roles fall away. And the self, the total center of the psyche, has the chance to be sensed, even if only for a fleeting moment. Jung described this process with remarkable subtlety in psychology and alchemy. There is no linear evolution. There is only a circumambulation of the self. There is no straight line progress in inner life, only slow revolutions around a deep center. The moment before sleep is one such revolution, a pause in striving, a pause in becoming, allowing us simply to be nearer to the center. For this reason, what we carry into sleep is never insignificant. A repeated word of self-blame can reinforce an inner myth of deficiency. Conversely, a whispered acceptance can become a seed of transformation. Jung believed that the psyche is always oriented toward wholeness, but it can only move in that direction when it is not blocked by the ego's refusal. He wrote, "What you resist persists. Before sleep, resistance is at its weakest. And that is precisely when change can begin, not loudly, not violently, but quietly and enduringly." This liminal moment does not require understanding analysis or active healing. It simply invites permission. permission for the body to rest, permission for the mind to settle, permission for the unconscious to do its work. In that permission, the psyche receives an essential signal that it is no longer abandoned. And when the psyche no longer has to scream to be noticed, it begins to speak through dreams, through symbols, through subtle movements in waking life. Thus, the 30 seconds before sleep are not merely the end of a day. They are a gateway into a deeper process, the process Jung called individuation. Not becoming someone else, but returning to what one has always been. And sometimes all that process requires is a moment of sufficient stillness for the ego to let go. The moment before sleep, as we have seen, is not merely the ending of a long day, but a threshold where the psyche opens as the ego grows weary and relinquishes control. Yet what happens immediately afterward, within the fragile space between waking and dreaming, is even more subtle. For when the ego steps back, it is not only emotions or memories that rise to the surface, but language itself begins to change its nature. At this point, words are no longer tools of social communication. They become psychological acts, forces that act directly upon the unconscious. For Jung, words were never neutral signs. They carry within them history symbolism and psychic energy accumulated through centuries of human experience. He wrote in The Structure and Dynamics of the Psyche, words and images are the carriers of psychic meaning. This means that every word, every image bears a psychological charge capable of activating, directing, or disturbing inner processes. During the day, the ego uses language rationally to explain, to argue, to control. But when consciousness dims, especially in the half-awake, half-asleep state, language slips free from that censorship and returns to its primordial function, acting directly upon the psyche. Jung believed that the unconscious does not respond to arguments, but to symbols. In Man and His Symbols, he emphasized the unconscious speaks in symbols and images, not in words. Yet here lies the paradox: words themselves, when spoken in a state that is soft enough, slow enough, and undefended enough, can become living symbols. In that moment, speech is no longer content, but symbolic action, a silent directive delivered straight to the unconscious. In the liminal state between waking and sleep, the ego lacks the energy to object. Is this true or false? Is this reasonable? Should I believe this? Instead, the psyche receives words as orientation. This is why Jung repeatedly warned about what human beings say to themselves. He wrote in Ion, "Affect is the chief architect of the unconscious. It is not reason, but emotion bound to language that determines impact. A sentence saturated with self-blame, when repeated in a state of strong affect and weakened ego, can crystallize into an unconscious truth. Conversely, a sentence of acceptance, whispered into the stillness of night, can begin to restructure the psyche from within. This explains why Jung never regarded language as harmless. Language does not merely describe reality, it shapes psychological reality. He once wrote, "The psyche creates reality every day, and language is one of its primary tools of creation." When fully awake, the ego constantly edits, denies, or postpones the effects of words. But when tired, when relaxed, especially before sleep, this defensive mechanism weakens. At that point, language becomes a symbolic directive to the unconscious, not a command in the sense of force, but an orientation in the sense of planting a seed. Marie-Louise von Franz understood this mechanism deeply through her study of rituals, incantations, and whispered phrases in fairy tales and mythology. Repeated nighttime phrases are not meant to persuade consciousness, but to position the psyche. They tell the unconscious, "This is how the world works. This is your place within it." Jung referred to these structures as inner myths, unconscious narratives, by which people live without realizing it. In Memories, Dreams, Reflections, Jung acknowledged the formative power of unconscious statements. "I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become." What is often overlooked is that this choice rarely occurs in full waking consciousness. It more often arises in quiet moments when the ego is no longer competing for control, such as just before sleep. There, language does not need to be logical. It only needs to be sincere and felt. For this reason, Jung did not encourage positive lying to oneself. The unconscious detects falseness immediately. A statement has effect only when it resonates with genuine feeling. Jung wrote, "The unconscious can only be reached by a genuine experience. Language, in the half-awake, half-asleep state, becomes a psychological instrument only when it is spoken from a place of honesty, without defense, without performance." When this is understood, we begin to view nighttime words differently. They are no longer idle phrases, but psychological seeds. Whatever is sown into the unconscious works with it through the night, through dreams, images, and subtle emotional shifts the following day. And because the psyche is always oriented toward wholeness, symbolic directives, grounded in acceptance and compassion, are amplified in the most natural way. Thus, if the moment before sleep is the gateway to the unconscious, then language is the key. Not a key of control, but of orientation. Not to force the psyche to change, but to let it know you are ready to listen. And sometimes all it takes is one well-timed whisper for the unconscious to begin rewriting its own story. When language has completed its role, when the final whispers of the day have been planted into the unconscious like symbolic seeds, another process begins quiet, yet far more powerful. This is the moment when the ego withdraws from its central position, not because it has been defeated, but because it is tired. And in this temporary rest of the ego, the psyche steps forward to carry out the work that daytime consciousness could never fully accomplish. Jung never believed that sleep was a passive state of the mind. On the contrary, he held that when consciousness dims its own light, inner life truly begins to shine. He wrote with great clarity, "In each of us, there is another whom we do not know. By day, human beings live alongside the ego, the part that knows who we are, what we should do, and how we must appear. But at night, when these roles fall away, the other within begins to speak. This presence does not speak through arguments, but through images. It does not debate, but stages scenes. It does not demand, but invites itself to be seen. The ego sleeps, but the psyche does not. On the contrary, it is most active at night. Unprocessed memories, postponed conflicts, wounds that were never named, all begin to find a way to appear. Jung regarded dreams as the primary arena of this process, and he described them with a famous image in The Meaning of Psychology for Modern Man. The dream is the small hidden door in the deepest and most intimate sanctum of the soul. Dreams are not random products of the brain, but small doors leading into the innermost chambers of the psyche, where processes of healing and reorganization unfold without requiring the ego's permission. By day, the ego often obstructs this process through haste and defensiveness. It wants to understand immediately, solve quickly, move on as soon as possible. But the psyche does not operate at that pace. Jung emphasized that the unconscious does not follow the logic of efficiency, but the logic of meaning. He wrote, "The unconscious is not just evil by nature, it is also the source of the highest good. The places human beings fear most tangled images, disturbing dreams, emotions that rise at night, are also the very places where the deepest potential for healing resides. It is precisely within this context that words spoken before sleep become especially significant. As the ego weakens, the unconscious is no longer shielded by doubt or resistance. Statements planted at that time cease to be mere ideas and become orientations, not commands in a coercive sense, but directional forces shaping the flow of the psyche. Jung believed that the unconscious is always at work, but it requires material. And the final words of the day provide exactly that material. In the structure and dynamics of the psyche, Jung wrote, "The psyche is a self-regulating system. It continually seeks balance, compensation, and movement toward wholeness. But in order to do so, it must know where the point of orientation lies. When a person whispers self-blame to themselves, the psyche responds through dreams that expose that pain. When a person whispers acceptance, the psyche searches for ways to integrate what has been split off, not because it obeys, but because it responds naturally to the signal it receives." Marie-Louise von Franz emphasized that many healing processes do not occur in waking awareness, but at night, where human beings are no longer striving to become better, but are simply staying with themselves. Jung warned that when the unconscious is not listened to, it will find more distorted paths of expression. His well-known statement resounds as a reminder. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. Dreams are the unconscious's attempt to become conscious, not through concepts, but through experience. While the ego sleeps, the psyche not only processes the past, but also restructures the future. Jung believed that dreams are not merely retrospective, but compensatory and purposive. They reveal how the psyche is attempting to bring the individual closer to the self, the total center of psychic life. He wrote in Ion, "The self is not only the center, but also the circumference of the whole personality. When the ego temporarily withdraws at night, the self can be sensed not as a concept, but as a quiet feeling of wholeness. For this reason, the state in which one enters sleep has never been a trivial matter. Not because one must say the right sentence, but because the psyche will work throughout the night with whatever is carried into it. An unnamed fear will appear in symbolic form. A rejected emotion will return as imagery, and a whispered acceptance, however faint, can soothe an entire inner process under strain. The ego sleeps, but the psyche does not. It works on your behalf. It processes what you have not yet processed. It attempts to reconnect the fragmented parts of who you are. And when you wake the following morning, you may not remember. The dream may not understand what occurred. Yet you will sense a subtle shift. Jung regarded this as the sign of a process moving in the right direction. Thus, if language is the key, then sleep is the alchemical workshop of the psyche. There, whatever has been planted is melted down, transformed and restructured according to a logic deeper than the logic of consciousness. And sometimes, the wisest thing the ego can do is to surrender to sleep so the psyche may carry out its work in silence. As the night passes and the psyche works quietly through sleep, processing memories, conflicts, and parts that have never been fully lived, one thing gradually becomes clear. The unconscious does not seek complex solutions. It does not require long-term plans or promises for the future. What the psyche needs first and foremost is a correct inner attitude. And it is here that from Jung's vast body of work, one can distill a statement so brief it seems almost too simple. Yet it contains the full spirit of healing and individuation. I accept all of myself right now. Jung never offered fixed mantras or rigid techniques. He was wary of any attempt to reduce psychic life to a method. Yet, throughout his writings, one principle appears again and again. Acceptance precedes all transformation. He wrote in Psychological Types, "Acceptance of oneself is the essence of the whole moral problem and the epitome of a whole outlook on life. Self-acceptance is not a secondary detail. It is the moral and psychological axis of the entire human developmental process." The 7 words in this statement are not accidental. Each carries its own psychological layer, and when placed together, they form a complete structure for the psyche. I, a word that seems self-evident, is in fact the first and most difficult step. Jung consistently distinguished between ego and self, yet he also emphasized that no path leads to the self unless the ego is willing to assume responsibility. To say I is to declare psychological ownership, I no longer project blame outward. I no longer live entirely in reaction. Jung wrote in the relations between the ego and the unconscious, "There is no coming to consciousness without pain. The first pain is precisely this. The ego must say, I am here in this process. Accept is the central word." Jung stressed that what is rejected does not disappear. It merely retreats into the shadows and grows stronger. The well-known formulation distilled from his thought resounds like a psychological law. What you resist persists. Acceptance in Jungian language is not the approval of behavior, nor is it resignation to fate. It is the act of facing what is without idealization, without avoidance. Only when a part is accepted can it change the manner of its existence within the psyche. All is what makes this statement radical, and also what frightens many people. Jung never believed in selective healing. He wrote in Aion, "The shadow is a moral problem that challenges the whole ego personality. All includes the shadow. The unflattering impulses, the shamed emotions, the desires once forbidden. Without all acceptance, becomes a subtle form of denial. And the psyche recognizes this immediately. Of myself shifts the focus away from external standards and back to the inner totality. Jung described the self as both the center and the circumference of psychic life. He wrote, "The self is not only the center, but also the circumference of the whole personality." When one says, "myself," the statement no longer targets a single fragment, but addresses the entire psychic system, where archetypes, complexes, memories, and potentials coexist. Right now is the decisive temporal element. Jung understood clearly that the unconscious does not operate in the future or in hypothetical states. It knows only the psychological present. He wrote in Modern Man in Search of a Soul, "Life always seems to go on behind our backs. To say right now is to end postponement, to end bargaining with the psyche. Not when I am better, not after I fix myself, but in this very state of imperfection." When these 7 words are spoken, especially in the half-awake, half-asleep state, they are no longer an affirmation of willpower. They become a positioning signal sent to the unconscious that the inner battle has paused, that no part is completely exiled. Jung believed that the psyche is always oriented toward wholeness, but it can do so only when the ego does not block it through constant judgment. He wrote, "Wholeness is not achieved by cutting off a portion of one's being, but by integration of the contraries." The statement, "I accept all of myself right now," does not make problems disappear. It gives them a place. And that is precisely the beginning of individuation. Not a destination, but a way of living. Jung never promised permanent happiness. He promised meaning. And meaning in his thought always arises when human beings stop fighting themselves. For this reason, these 7 words are not a sentence meant to convince oneself. They are an inner invitation. An invitation addressed to the shadow, to the exhausted parts, to the unloved fragments. You are allowed to be here. When this invitation is repeated with sufficient gentleness and sincerity, the psyche begins to change the way it expresses itself, not because it is forced, but because it has finally been heard. And it is precisely here that the process of individuation, so often imagined as abstract and distant, becomes deeply human. Not through heroic effort, but through a single moment of total acceptance, right here and right now. When the statement, "I accept all of myself right now," is spoken in the stillness of night, the first word to resonate within the psyche is not accept, nor all, but I. A very short, very familiar word, yet one that carries immense psychological weight. For before one can accept anything at all, one must determine who is standing at the center of that experience. And in Jung's theory, beginning with I is anything but self-evident. It is an act of inner maturity. Jung never simply equated I with the ego. He understood clearly that the ego is only the center of consciousness, not the whole person. Yet he also emphasized that there is no path to the self unless the ego is willing to step forward and assume responsibility. In the relations between the ego and the unconscious, Jung wrote, "The ego is the subject of all personal acts of consciousness. To say I is to acknowledge I am present here in this experience, in this conflict, in this process, not as a mere victim, nor as a detached observer, but as a subject capable of responding to one's own inner life." This marks a crucial transition from the previous stage. When the 7 key words are spoken, they establish an attitude of total acceptance. But it is the word I that serves as the anchor, the point at which that attitude is placed within a specific position in the psyche. Without I, acceptance remains an abstract idea. With I, acceptance becomes a lived act. Jung issued particular warnings about projection as a mechanism for avoiding inner responsibility. He wrote in Ion, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. Projection is the ego's way of pushing uncomfortable parts of itself outward, assigning them to other people, other circumstances, other fates. To begin with is to stop projecting. No longer, they did this to me. Life treated me this way, but rather, I am reacting. I am feeling, I am carrying this. This is not self-blame, but the retrieval of psychic energy that has been dispersed outward. In Jungian language, withdrawing projections is one of the most painful yet necessary steps of individuation. Jung wrote bluntly, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." The word I is the first lamp lit within that darkness. It does not banish the dark, but it allows one to remain with it without disintegrating. More importantly, I is not an endpoint. It is a gateway. Jung clearly distinguished between ego and self, yet he did not regard the ego as an enemy. The ego is a vehicle, not the destination. In Psychology and Alchemy, he wrote, "The ego is only the center of consciousness, whereas the self is the center of the total personality." When I is spoken with honesty, the ego does not elevate itself to the whole. It acknowledges its own limitations. And precisely in that acknowledgement, the gateway to the self begins to open. Beginning with, I also marks the end of living entirely in reaction. Reaction is the mechanism of a passive ego forever chasing external stimuli. Jung believed that much of modern psychological suffering arises from the loss of one's position as subject. He wrote in Modern Man in Search of a Soul, "Man's task is to become conscious of the contents that press upward from the unconscious. That task cannot be fulfilled without an I strong enough to stay with experience, rather than deflecting blame or fleeing. I, therefore, is not a declaration of power, but a declaration of inner responsibility. It says, I do not control everything, but I take responsibility for how I am present with what is happening within me. This is the subtle yet decisive difference between control and sovereignty. Control belongs to the defensive ego. Sovereignty belongs to the mature ego, ready to serve the self. Marie-Louise von Franz repeatedly emphasized that individuation does not begin with understanding Jung correctly, but with stopping the act of living someone else's life. The word I is the first severance from borrowed scripts from family society or the collective. Jung referred to such scripts as collective attitudes, and he warned that if they remain unconscious, they will govern a person like an invisible fate. His famous statement resounds once more with its full weight. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. To say is to begin rewriting that story from within, not through rigid willpower, but through conscious presence. And it is this very presence that allows the words that follow, accept all of myself right now, to become truly effective. For without an I willing to assume responsibility, no acceptance can truly enter the psyche. Thus, among the 7 essential words, I is not merely the opening word. It is the foundation, a foundation that is quiet, unadorned, yet solid enough for the entire process of individuation to unfold. To begin with, I is the first step in reclaiming authorship of one's inner life, not to dominate it, but to listen to it fully and responsibly. When the word I has been spoken as a declaration of psychological sovereignty, when the ego is willing to take its proper place and stop projecting responsibility outward, the inner process does not end there. An I that is not followed by the next act quickly turns into a new defensive ego, more rigid, more subtle. This is precisely why immediately after I, the second keyword appears with no less decisive weight. Accept. If I is the step of standing at the center of experience, then accept is the step of staying with what is seen, without fleeing, without fixing, without trying to make it more tolerable. Jung emphasized that healing does not begin with change, but with radical acceptance of what already exists. He repeatedly warned that Anything rejected, suppressed, or denied within the psyche does not disappear, but retreats into the unconscious and returns with greater force. This idea is often condensed into the well-known formulation associated with Jung: "What you resist persists." Though quoted in various forms, the spirit of this statement runs through his entire body of work. The ego's resistance is the very fuel that feeds what it fears most. In everyday language, accept is often misunderstood as resignation, endurance, or surrender to fate. But for Jung, acceptance carries no passive meaning. On the contrary, it is a psychological act that demands great courage. To accept means to face inner reality directly without idealizing it, without justifying it, and without attempting to turn it into something else immediately. Jung wrote in Psychological Types, "Acceptance of oneself is the essence of the whole moral problem, and the epitome of a whole outlook on life." Self-acceptance is not merely a healing technique. It is an ethical and existential stance toward life itself. The core of acceptance in Jungian thought lies in the shadow, the dark aspect of the psyche, where qualities rejected for failing to align with one's self-image or collective norms are stored. Jung described the shadow with stark clarity in Ion. The shadow is a moral problem that challenges the whole ego personality. The shadow is not evil in a simplistic moral sense. It is the sum of what the ego refuses to acknowledge as its own anger, envy, vulnerability, the desire for power, the fear of abandonment. To accept means to allow the shadow to exist in consciousness, not to act it out, but to stop denying its presence. Jung believed that the denial of the shadow is the source of much personal and collective suffering. When people do not accept their own darkness, they project it outward, creating enemies, creating problems, creating fate. He wrote, "Everyone carries a shadow, and the less it is embodied in the individual's conscious life, the blacker and denser it is." Acceptance, therefore, does not eliminate the shadow. It renders it less toxic. When seen and named, the shadow loses its power to manipulate from behind the scenes. What makes acceptance so difficult is the ego's constant urge to rush toward solutions. It wants to fix, to improve, to become better. But Jung argued that premature striving for improvement is often a subtle form of avoidance. He wrote in The Structure and Dynamics of the Psyche, "There is no change from darkness to light, or from inertia to movement, without emotion. Emotion can only be felt when the ego is willing to stop and remain with what is. Accept is precisely this act of stopping. Here, acceptance does not oppose change. It is the precondition for change." Jung compared this process to psychological alchemy. Before transformation can occur, there must be nigredo, the dark phase of dissolution, where material is seen exactly as it is. Without Negredo, every attempt to bring light is mere illusion. He wrote in Psychology and Alchemy, "Only in the state of complete abandonment can the transformation take place." Complete abandonment here does not mean giving up, but relinquishing the ego's control, so the psyche may operate on its own terms. Marie-Louise von Franz continued this line of thought by emphasizing that many people wish to work with the shadow without truly accepting it. They want to understand the shadow in order to overcome it rather than to live with it consciously. But Jung maintained that individuation is not the elimination of darkness. It is the expansion of consciousness large enough to contain it. He wrote, "Wholeness is not achieved by cutting off a portion of one's being, but by integration of the contraries. Accept, therefore, is not a gentle word. It is a narrow gate. To pass through it, one must relinquish the illusion of being only what is good, reasonable, and acceptable. Yet the reward of acceptance is not immediate comfort. The reward is wholeness. When the psyche no longer expends energy hiding from or fighting itself, that energy is released for creativity, meaning, and a more vital life." In the 7-word statement, the placement of accept immediately after I is not accidental. Only when the ego has taken its rightful position can it accept without collapsing. And only when acceptance is present do the following words, "all of myself, right now," become possible. Without acceptance, every other affirmation remains an empty ideal. Thus, in the Jungian process, acceptance is not the destination. It is the beginning of healing, a quiet beginning that promises no quick results, but opens the only path Jung believed to be meaningful, the path by which human beings stop fighting themselves and thereby allow transformation to unfold according to the deep rhythm of the psyche. When the word accept has been placed as an act of courage, when the ego is willing to stop and look directly at inner reality without immediately trying to fix it, a deeper, more uncomfortable question arises at once. Accept what it is. Precisely here that the next keyword in the 7-word Jungian statement steps into the light with its full weight. All. Not a part. Not what is easy to love. But everything. All is the word at which many healing processes come to a halt. In reality, very few people completely refuse self-acceptance. What they refuse is unconditional acceptance. The ego is willing to accept sadness, exhaustion, even suffering, as long as these do not threaten the moral, social, or spiritual image it has constructed. But Jung argued that such conditional acceptance is merely a more refined form of denial. He wrote in Aion, The shadow is a moral problem that challenges the whole ego personality. All is the point at which that challenge becomes unavoidable. In shadow work, all does not carry a simple moral meaning. It does not sort which parts are worthy of acceptance and which are not. All includes what the ego does not want to claim as its own fear: anger, envy, vulnerability, the desire for power, the longing to be recognized, the fear of abandonment. Jung emphasized that these qualities are not inherently bad. They become dangerous only when they are denied. He wrote, "Everyone carries a shadow, and the less it is embodied in the individual's conscious life, the blacker and denser it is. The more the shadow is rejected, the denser it becomes, and the more it governs behavior from behind the scenes. All, therefore, is a radical invitation not to selectively keep the light parts and exile the dark ones." Jung never encouraged living from the shadow. He drew a clear distinction between making something conscious and acting it out. Accepting anger does not mean acting in anger. Accepting envy does not mean letting envy rule one's life. To accept all means to allow these contents to be present in consciousness, so they no longer have to manipulate from the unconscious. Jung wrote in The Relations Between the Ego and the Unconscious, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." The key point here is that shadow work is not about adding something new, but about retrieving what has been disowned. Retrieving the psychic energy that was pushed outward through projection. Jung viewed projection as the direct consequence of failing to accept all. He wrote, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. What we cannot tolerate in others is often precisely what we have not yet accepted in ourselves. When all is not accepted, the outer world becomes a battlefield for unrecognized inner shadows. All is also where many mistakenly believe Jung advocated a kind of moral dissolution. In truth, the opposite is the case. Jung maintained that only when a person becomes conscious of their whole being can they possess genuine moral responsibility. Someone who does not know their own capacity for anger or cruelty cannot truly choose not to act on it. He wrote in Psychology and Religion, "No tree, it is said, can grow to heaven unless its roots reach down to hell. All means allowing the roots to descend, not to remain in hell, but so the tree may stand firmly and grow upward." In the process of individuation, Jung saw the acceptance of one's whole being as a transition from collective morality to personal morality. One no longer lives solely by what should be, but begins to live with what is. This does not make a person selfish. On the contrary, it makes them less dangerous to others. A shadow that has been made conscious is far less likely to erupt unconsciously. Jung wrote, "The unconscious is not just evil by nature, it is also the source of the highest good. All includes creative potential, vitality, and powerful life instincts, qualities often suppressed by rigid moral frameworks." Marie-Louise von Franz emphasized that many people fail in shadow work, not because they are bad, but because they wish to heal only the wounded parts of themselves, not the shameful ones. But the psyche makes no such distinction. For the unconscious, every content carries informational value. When one part is excluded, the entire system loses balance. Jung referred to this as inner fragmentation, and he understood individuation as the opposite process, a movement toward convergence. All, therefore, is not a comforting word. It is a challenge. To accept one's whole being means relinquishing the illusion that wholeness can be achieved by removing what is unacceptable. Jung wrote in Modern Man in Search of a Soul, "Life demands for its completion and fulfillment a balance between the opposites. There can be no balance if only one pole is preserved." In the 7-word statement, all stands immediately after accept, to emphasize that healing does not occur in fragments according to the ego's preferences. The psyche does not operate by moral priority lists. It seeks functional wholeness. When all parts are allowed to exist in consciousness, psychic energy is no longer consumed by concealment and resistance. From this arises a deep relief, not because everything is resolved, but because nothing is exiled. Thus, all is the foundation of shadow work. Without all, there is no integration. Without integration, there is no individuation. And without individuation, a human being continues to live as a collection of unconscious reactions, rather than as a living, responsible whole. Accepting everything does not make a person perfect. It makes them real. And in Jung's thought, that is the closest human beings can come to healing. When the word all has been spoken with its full weight, when a person no longer selects which parts are allowed to exist and which must be exiled, the psyche enters a very different state. There are no longer clear battle lines between ego and shadow, between light and darkness. Yet, at that very moment, a deeper question arises. To whom do all these parts belong? It is precisely here that the next keyword appears quietly, yet decisively: myself. Myself is not a grammatical emphasis. In Jungian language, it is a psychological point of reference. After saying I and accepting all myself, redirects the entire statement away from the isolated ego toward the self, the totality of the psyche, the deepest organizing center of psychic life. Jung made this distinction very clear in psychology and alchemy. The ego is only the center of consciousness, whereas the self is the center of the total personality. To say myself means that the statement is no longer aimed at the daytime ego struggling to control, but toward a larger container, one in which archetypes, complexes, conflicts, and potentials coexist. This marks a crucial turning point in the process of individuation. In the earlier stages, the focus lies on the ego taking responsibility, suspending resistance, and opening the door to the shadow. But if the process stops there, a person can easily become over-identified with darkness or lost in endless self-work without orientation. Jung warned that contact with the unconscious without a relationship to the self can lead to imbalance. He wrote in The Relations between the ego and the unconscious. The danger is that the ego may be swallowed up by the unconscious. Myself is the key word that restores order. It reminds us that there is an observing, containing, and coordinating center one that transcends the ego without negating it. In deep psychological experience, the self is rarely felt as a concept. It is more often sensed as a background feeling, the sense that there is something within us broader than fear, deeper than trauma, and more enduring than emotional fluctuation. Jung described the self as an archetype of wholeness, emphasizing that genuine healing begins only when a living relationship with it is established. He wrote in Ion, "The self is the archetype of order and totality. Myself, therefore, is not a return to the old ego, but a shift of inner ground." The statement no longer arises from a defensive position, but from a place spacious enough to hold contradiction. When one says, myself, one implicitly acknowledges there is more in me than I am currently conscious of. And it is precisely this acknowledgement that opens the possibility of healing beyond personal effort. Jung did not believe that the self does healing in an active sense. Rather, it allows healing to occur by holding the parts of the psyche in an ordered relationship. He wrote in The Structure and Dynamics of the Psyche. The psyche is a self-regulating system. The self is that principle of self-regulation. When the ego connects to the self, instead of attempting to occupy the central position, conflicts no longer need to be resolved by force. They are contained, viewed from a wider perspective, and gradually transformed in form. In the practice of shadow work, myself functions like the alchemical vessel. If all brings the raw material into the process, then myself is the vessel strong enough to withstand the heat of contradiction. Jung employed alchemical imagery extensively to describe this. He wrote in Psychology and Alchemy, "The vessel is the prerequisite of transformation. Without a vessel, material burns up or disperses. Without the self-shadow, work easily turns into self-torment or extreme identification." Marie-Louise von Franz emphasized that the self is not a higher version of the ego. It is not more moral, more intelligent, or more positive. It is more whole. The self contains both light and darkness, both nobility and instinct. When language turns toward myself, it sends a vital signal to the psyche that every part has a place within a larger whole and does not need to fight for control. Jung warned that many people confuse the self with an idealized self-image. But the self is not an ideal. It often appears in dreams as paradoxical symbols, sometimes frightening, sometimes ordinary. He wrote in Man and His Symbols, "The self appears in dreams in symbolic form. Myself, therefore, is not a clear declaration of identity, but an inward orientation, a turning toward the symbolic center where the psyche organizes itself." In the 7-word statement, myself plays a pivotal role. It binds the entire healing process to a center that is impersonal, yet deeply intimate. No longer is it I versus my shadow, but the whole person being held within a deeper order. When this occurs, healing no longer depends on whether the ego is strong enough or knowledgeable enough. It becomes a natural process operating from within. Thus, myself is not a narrowing inward, but an expansion of identity. It allows a person to cease complete identification with the fleeting movements of mind and emotion. Jung wrote in Modern Man in Search of a Soul, "The acceptance of oneself is the essence of the whole moral problem. But acceptance becomes truly complete only when there is a self wide enough to receive it." From the word myself, the process of individuation enters a new phase. It is no longer merely the courage to look into darkness, but the learning of how to remain in a living relationship with the inner center of healing. And it is from this center that the next words right now can carry the full transformative power of the living present. When the word myself has completed its role, when the statement no longer addresses a defensive ego, but has found its ground in the self, the total center of the psyche, the healing process might seem complete. Yet Jung understood that merely recognizing the self is not enough. A connection that is not anchored in lived time quickly collapses into abstraction. This is why the next keyword appears as a decisive cut through the ego's habit of postponement right now. In Jungian thought, the unconscious does not operate according to linear time. It does not understand tomorrow, does not respond to promises such as when I am more ready, and is not persuaded by indefinitely delayed plans. Jung wrote in The Structure and Dynamics of the Psyche, "The unconscious has no sense of time." This does not mean that the unconscious is unaware of the past or future, but that it functions only within psychological presence, where emotion is alive. Images are in motion, and energy is flowing. The ego, by contrast, is a master of postponement. It always says, later, when things are better, when I understand more, when I am strong enough. Jung recognized that much suffering does not arise from lack of understanding, but from deferring acceptance to a moment that never arrives. He wrote in Modern Man in Search of a Soul, "Life always seems to go on behind our backs." Life and the psyche does not wait for the ego to be ready. It continues, and if it is not met in the present, it will seek expression through symptoms, dreams, and painful repetitions. Right now, therefore, is a psychologically disruptive act. It cuts through the ego's bargaining with the unconscious. No longer after I fix myself, no longer when I am less broken, but in this very state. Jung believed that only when a person dares to face inner reality as it is, can transformation begin. He wrote, "The acceptance of oneself is the essence of the whole moral problem. But that acceptance cannot occur in the future. It can only take place now. In the process of individuation, right now, marks the shift from understanding to presence." A person may read Jung understand the shadow, speak about the self. But if all of this is projected into an immortal future, where one is already less conflicted, the psyche still does not receive the signal of safety required to open. Jung wrote in Psychological Types, "What we do not bring to consciousness appears in our lives as fate. To bring something into consciousness is not to think about it, but to remain with it in the present moment. Especially in the half-awake, half-asleep state right now, carries a rare potency. When the ego is fatigued, when defensive structures loosen, the psyche is most open to temporal signals. At that moment, saying right now is no longer an act of willpower, but an orienting marker. No more postponement, no more escape, no more conditions. Jung believed that such moments carry the quality of kairos, the right time, not measured by clocks, but by inner rhythm. In Ion, Jung emphasized that the self does not emerge when a person reaches perfection, but when the ego relinquishes resistance in the present. He wrote, "The self is made manifest in the opposites. Opposites can only be held simultaneously in the present. The future always promises to resolve conflict through exclusion. The present demands that one contain contradiction. And it is precisely this capacity that makes right now the gateway of healing. Marie-Louise von Franz emphasized that many people understand Jung correctly, yet remain stuck because they turn individuation into a long-term project rather than a lived attitude in each moment. Jung never said that one would ever be finished with the unconscious. He said that one could enter into a right relationship with it, and that relationship exists only in the present. Right now also dismantles the illusion that one must feel ready in order to accept. Jung understood that readiness is often just a refined form of control. He wrote in Psychology and Alchemy, only in the state of complete abandonment can the transformation take place. Complete abandonment does not mean giving up. It means relinquishing the privilege of delay. To say right now is precisely that act of relinquishment. When the 7-word statement is spoken in full right now, is the word that pins the entire process into lived immediacy. Without it, the statement remains philosophy. With it, the statement becomes a psychological event. The psyche recognizes that this is not an idea to be considered, but a reality to work with. In everyday life, this has profound implications. A person no longer says, "I will accept myself when I am better," but instead, "I accept myself right now." Jung believed that this subtle shift redirects the entire flow of psychic energy. He wrote, "Energy flows where attention goes. When attention rests in the present, energy withdraws from the unconscious loops of past and future." Thus, right now is not a demand to change immediately. It is a permission to be fully present in this moment. And when the psyche is met in the present, it no longer needs to shout through anxiety symptoms or violent dreams. It begins to speak through subtler movements. Relief, clarity, and a sense of inner groundedness. In the Jungian process, healing does not happen later. It happens now or not at all. And for this reason, right now is not merely the final word of the statement. It is the only temporal doorway through which the psyche can step back into its own wholeness. When the 7-word statement is spoken in its entirety, "I accept all of myself right now," and anchored firmly in the living present, something subtle yet decisive takes place. The unconscious receives a signal of safety, not safety in the sense of comfort, but in the most fundamental psychological sense, no longer being driven away. It is precisely at this point that the process of shadow integration ceases to be a theoretical concept and begins to operate in silence. And the place where it begins is not during the day, but at night. Jung consistently emphasized that the shadow does not seek destruction. It seeks recognition. When it is denied, the shadow is forced to speak through harsher channels. Groundless anxiety emotional outbursts, repetitive obsessions, or violent dreams. But when the 7 words are spoken with sincerity, not as a slogan, but as an inner attitude, the shadow receives for the first time an invitation: you are allowed to return. Jung wrote in Ion, "The shadow is a moral problem that challenges the whole ego personality. And precisely because it is a moral problem, the shadow can only be addressed through relationship, not through exclusion." The previous section has shown that right now is the only temporal doorway the psyche understands. When that doorway opens, the night becomes the unconscious's natural working space. Jung never regarded sleep as a withdrawal from psychological life. On the contrary, he saw it as the moment when the psyche is most free. He wrote in The Meaning of Psychology for Modern Man, "The dream is the small hidden door in the deepest and most intimate sanctum of the soul. That small door does not open for the controlling ego. It opens for the parts that were once exiled." Shadow integration begins at night because during the day, the ego is too busy to listen without defense. By day, the ego wants to fix, improve, justify, or deny. By night, when the ego grows tired and steps back, the shadow no longer needs to shout to be noticed. It begins to change its mode of expression. Instead of appearing as symptoms, it appears as symbols. Jung wrote, "In man and his symbols, the unconscious speaks in symbols and images, not in words. When the shadow is invited back, it no longer invades life through violence. It knocks on the door through imagery. This marks a crucial shift in the healing process. The shadow does not disappear. It is repositioned. From an unconscious saboteur, it becomes a character within the inner story, perhaps frightening, perhaps difficult to understand, but given a place. Jung emphasized that dreams do not aim to reassure the ego, but to compensate and regulate. He wrote in The Structure and Dynamics of the Psyche, "Dreams are impartial, spontaneous products of the unconscious psyche. When the shadow is accepted, dreams become less brutal, not because everything is resolved, but because attention no longer has to be forced." Many people fear shadow integration because they confuse it with being swallowed by darkness. Jung was acutely aware of this danger, and he drew a clear distinction between integration and identification. Integration means allowing the shadow to be present in consciousness. Identification means letting the shadow occupy the central position. When the 7 words are spoken in relation to the self, myself, right now, the process unfolds within the containment of the whole, not under the rule of a part. Jung wrote in The Relations Between the Ego and the Unconscious, The danger is that the ego may be swallowed up by the unconscious. But he also emphasized that this danger is significantly reduced when the ego no longer resists blindly, but enters into a conscious relationship. At night, the shadow often appears not as a villain, but as an undeciphered message. A strange figure, an unsettling scene, an action that contradicts the daytime self-image. When approached with an attitude of acceptance, these symbols begin to soften. They invite curiosity instead of fear. Jung regarded this as a sign that the shadow is being integrated properly. He wrote, "The unconscious is not just evil by nature. It is also the source of the highest good." Louise von Franz extended this insight by emphasizing that many genuine healing processes do not occur in the moment of sudden understanding, but in the nights that follow, when dreams gradually change their tone. Less pursuit, less collapse, more dialogue. This is not the disappearance of the shadow, but a transformation of the relationship with it. Jung saw this as a sign that individuation is moving in the right direction when opposing parts no longer have to exclude one another in order to exist. Shadow integration also begins because night is where the ego stops performing. There is no audience, no social role, no image to maintain. In darkness, the psyche does not need to be beautiful. It only needs to be real. Jung wrote in Psychology and Religion, "No tree, it is said, can grow to heaven unless its roots reach down to hell. Night is where those roots touch their depth. When the exiled parts receive an invitation to return, they no longer need to seize life through violence. They begin to participate in the creative process of the psyche. As a result, energy that was once trapped in conflict is released. Jung referred to this as a redistribution of psychic energy, a sign of a system that is regulating itself in a healthy way. Therefore, shadow integration is not a daytime event in which a person decides that they have accepted their darkness. It is a nocturnal process in which the psyche responds to that attitude of acceptance by changing the way it speaks. When the 7 words are spoken with sincerity, the shadow no longer needs to scream. It begins to whisper, and it is precisely within those whispers, dreams, images, subtle movements, that the deepest healing process of Jungian psychology quietly unfolds. When the shadow has been invited back during the night, when the parts that were once exiled no longer need to scream through anxiety or nightmares, but begin to speak through symbols, something even deeper begins to unfold quietly. The psyche does not merely regulate symptoms. It begins to rewrite the story a person is living. For Jung, human beings do not simply possess memories. They live within an inner myth, an unconscious script that shapes how they see themselves, the world, and the meaning of their lives. Jung believed that every person is governed by a foundational story of which they are rarely conscious. This story answers silent yet decisive questions. Who am I? Where do I belong? What is life asking of me? In memories, dreams, reflections, Jung wrote, "Man needs difficulties. They are necessary for health." Yet he also emphasized that what causes suffering is not difficulty itself, but the way one interprets one's place within that story. A person may live an entire life within the same circumstances, yet experience them completely differently, depending on which unconscious script is operating. The previous section showed that when shadow integration begins at night, the individual's relationship with the unconscious changes. From that point on, dreams are no longer merely a site of erupting conflict, but become the editing room of the inner myth. Jung never regarded dreams as random. He wrote in The Structure and Dynamics of the Psyche, "Dreams are the direct expression of the unconscious psychic situation. If the unconscious is the place where the foundational story is written, then dreams are where it is revised detail by detail, symbol by symbol, scene by scene." Rewriting the unconscious script does not mean inventing a more positive story in order to console oneself. Jung was deeply wary of all forms of will-based self-hypnosis. He believed that the psyche is not persuaded by beautiful words, but responds only to repeated experience. For this reason, the nighttime ritual, repeating the 7 words with sincerity, is not meant to change consciousness immediately. It is a micro-intervention, steady and continuous, into the deep structure of the inner myth. In many unconscious scripts, 2 foundational statements repeat like a painful refrain. I am broken, and I must hide. Jung viewed these as the consequences of a shadow that has been exiled for too long. When an essential part of the psyche is excluded, the whole person begins to live as a deficient being. Jung wrote in Ion, "The experience of the self is always a defeat for the ego. The ego experiences this fragmentation as a personal flaw rather than as a natural psychological process. The nighttime ritual repeated when the ego is tired and the unconscious is open begins to change the tone of the inner myth, not through argument, but through presence. When a person whispers to themselves each night, I accept all of myself. Right now, the psyche gradually receives a different message that no part is broken and in need of elimination. Jung wrote in Psychology and Religion, wholeness is not achieved by cutting off a portion of one's being, but by integration of the contraries. From here, the inner myth begins to shift from "I am broken, I am not yet integrated," a difference that is existentially decisive. The second transformation, from "I must hide" to "I am allowed to be fully present," occurs when the shadow is no longer perceived as a threat. Jung believed that most human concealment does not arise from morality, but from the fear of exclusion. When the psyche believes that only certain parts are acceptable, the entire system must live defensively. But when the nighttime ritual sends the opposite signal, that every part has a place within the self, the need to hide begins to diminish. Jung wrote, "The unconscious is not just evil by nature, it is also the source of the highest good. What matters is that the inner myth is not rewritten in a single night." Jung consistently emphasized the processual nature of individuation. He wrote in Modern Man in Search of a Soul, "Life demands for its completion and fulfillment a balance between the opposites. That balance is not achieved through sudden resolve, but through small, repeated adjustments. Each night, the ritual acts like a faint yet persistent stroke of the pen, subtly revising the unconscious script toward greater wholeness." Marie-Louise von Franz called this the slow work of the psyche. She emphasized that the psyche does not change through dramatic moments, but through the steady rhythm of being listened to. When a person patiently repeats this ritual, the inner myth gradually loses its self-accusing chapters and gains new passages, ones in which a human being no longer has to hide in order to be loved. Jung believed that when the inner myth changes, outer life changes as well. Not because circumstances are different, but because meaning has changed. He wrote, "The least of things with a meaning is worth more in life than the greatest of things without it." A person living from the story "I am whole" enters the world differently, less defensive, less self-attacking, less governed by the gaze of others. Rewriting the unconscious script is not an act of heroic will. It is the result of the psyche being met consistently at night, where it is most receptive. When the shadow is integrated, when the self becomes the point of reference, when the present is chosen instead of postponement, the inner myth begins to tell a new story, not a story of perfection, but one of full presence. And within this new story, a human being no longer lives as a defective character trapped in their own script. They begin to live as an author, gradually becoming conscious of the story they are writing, night by night, moment by moment, within the slow, deep rhythm of the psyche. After the unconscious script has begun to be rewritten during the night, when the inner myth shifts from deficiency to wholeness, from hiding to presence, something subtle yet decisive occurs. The change does not remain confined to sleep. It quietly follows the person into daytime life. Jung repeatedly emphasized that the unconscious is not a parallel world separate from everyday existence. On the contrary, it is the invisible foundation beneath every choice, reaction, and relationship. When that foundation changes, the structure built upon it must change as well. At first, the practitioner may not notice anything obvious. There is no dramatic moment of awakening, no sensation of being fully healed. But gradually, a delicate difference emerges. Unconscious reactions begin to weaken. Where once a glance, a remark, or a familiar situation could immediately trigger anxiety, defensiveness, or self-attack, now a small gap appears between stimulus and response. Jung called this the moment of consciousness, the point at which the ego is no longer seized by a complex. He wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." When the unconscious is seen, a person is no longer dragged along by the old psychological destiny. Alongside this, the inner voice of self-criticism begins to soften, not because it disappears, but because it is no longer taken as absolute truth. As the self, the total center of the psyche, begins to establish itself as an inner anchor. The ego no longer needs to attack itself in order to maintain control or ensure survival. Jung understood this mechanism clearly when he wrote, "Self-acceptance is the essence of the moral problem and the epitome of a whole outlook on life." Self-acceptance is not merely a personal attitude. It is a fundamental shift in how a person stands in the world. Another significant consequence is that psychological boundaries begin to form naturally. One no longer has to learn how to say no through strained effort, nor erect rigid walls in order to protect oneself. When one lives from wholeness, energy no longer flows outward in search of validation or compensation. Boundaries arise as a natural outcome of knowing who one is and who one is not. Jung described this process not as defense, but as the maturation of consciousness. Individuation means becoming an individual. And insofar as individuality embraces our innermost last and incomparable uniqueness, it also implies becoming one's own self. Here, the concept of individuation. Jung's ultimate aim ceases to be abstract. It is not about becoming a better version, nor about surpassing others. Individuation is the process of becoming who one essentially is prior to fragmentation, by fear, excessive adaptation, or inherited unconscious scripts. When the nighttime ritual is repeated consistently, the psyche learns a new language, the language of wholeness. And that language gradually permeates every moment of daytime life. It is important to note that this path does not make a person more perfect, but more real. Difficult emotions still arise. Darkness still exists. But these no longer need to seize control of life in order to be acknowledged. Jung expressed this with a sentence both simple and profound. Wholeness is not achieved by cutting off a portion of one's being, but by integration of the contraries. It is precisely this integration that makes life livable, not the absence of suffering. From the nighttime ritual to daytime life, what unfolds is not a miracle, but a slow restructuring of the personality. The practitioner begins to live less from deficiency, less from reflex, and more from presence. Not because the work is finished, but because the right process has begun. And for Jung, that alone is what matters most. For once, a person is moving in the right direction. The psyche knows how to complete the rest. Ultimately, individuation is not a destination, but a way of living in which each night is an opportunity to return, and each day an opportunity to embody oneself more fully, not perfectly, but wholly. And now, you do not need to understand anything more. If something within you has been gently touched, a quieter feeling, a deeper breath, or simply a moment in which you no longer had to defend yourself, that is already enough. Carl Gustav Jung once said that true transformation is never loud. It does not arrive through determination, but through presence. Not through effort, but through allowing. And Marie-Louise von Franz devoted her entire life to reminding us of this. The psyche does not need to be forced in order to heal. It only needs to be listened to long enough and sincerely enough. Tonight, if you fall asleep, let sleep come naturally. If you do not sleep yet, that is also fine. Nothing more needs to happen. You do not need to become someone else. You do not need to fix yourself. You do not need to prove that you have made progress. You only need to be here in this body, in this moment, with your whole self. For Jung, this is the very beginning of individuation, not becoming perfect, but returning to what has always been. If you wish to continue this journey, allow the other videos in this series to guide you slowly, more deeply, into yourself. And for now, allow the night to do its work, wishing you a peaceful sleep.